welcome to this week's episode of Quick Insights on Congressional Investigations. I'm Andrew Olmem, a former Republican chief counsel at the Senate Banking Committee. I'm joined by Michael Levy, a white-collar defense attorney. Each week, we answer important questions surrounding congressional investigations. This week's question is a follow-up to our last episode that covered whether confidentiality applies to documents provided to Congress by third parties. This week, we're going to ask the related question. Can Congress obtain confidential materials provided to federal regulatory and enforcement agencies? Michael, what's the answer?
Well, it depends. It depends on the agency and it depends on the purpose for Congress's request. And frankly, even then, the answers aren't always clear. The strongest claim for maintaining confidentiality in the face of a congressional request likely rests with grand jury materials, which are very strongly protected from disclosure by Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E. When Congress seeks grand jury materials for an impeachment proceeding, however, some courts have held that grand jury materials can be disclosed to Congress pursuant to the judicial proceedings exception to Rule 6E. The Supreme Court actually was scheduled to resolve this issue last term in the context of presidential impeachment proceedings, but then for perhaps now obvious reasons, the case was vacated as moot.
Well, no, Michael, what if Congress seeks grand jury material for more traditional oversight investigations, non-impeachment context?
The circuits are really split. The First, Second, and Seventh Circuits all have held that district courts have inherent authority to release grand jury material, including in some circumstances in response to a congressional oversight investigation request. But the DC, the 6th, 8th, and 11th circuits have ruled that grand jury material only can be released pursuant to one of Rule 6E's enumerated exceptions, which don't include congressional oversight. And frankly, the more recent case law does seem to be trending in that direction.
Michael, well, what about congressional requests to other regulatory and enforcement agencies, and particularly the financial regulators, who I think a lot of our viewers would be particularly interested in knowing on how they treat and protect confidential information?
Well, material that's produced to those agencies is generally less protected from congressional requests, certainly than grand jury material. FOIA exemptions, for example, don't protect against congressional requests, and federal agencies naturally have a very strong political and budgetary reason for wanting to accede to congressional requests when they can. Many of them make no bones about it. So the SEC, for example, provides its Form 1662 to anyone from whom it seeks documents or testimony. And that form on its face says the commission can provide information to members of Congress, the press, and the public in response to, quote, inquiries relating to matters under the commission's jurisdiction. Essentially, the SEC is promising absolutely no confidentiality whatsoever. Every agency is differently situated and it needs to balance, on the one hand, its desire to keep Congress happy with its desire, on the other hand, to ensure that the entities it regulates feel comfortable sharing important but sensitive information with the agency. So, for example, the CFPB strikes this balance by notifying financial institutions whenever Congress asks for information that the institution has provided to the CFPB. At least that gives the institution an opportunity to prepare for the release of the information, or, if appropriate, object to the Bureau providing it to Congress. The more traditional bank regulatory agencies like the Federal Reserve and the OCC tend to be even more protective of information, particularly confidential supervisory information. Even with CSI, and Andrew, I know you saw some of this when you worked for the Senate Banking Committee, the regulators may be very protective of it, but at times they still may wind up producing some pretty sensitive information to Congress when Congress really pushes them. So you have to be prepared for that because it's really out of your control at that point.
Yeah, that's true. Although in my experience, Congress and the regulators are very, very careful with CSI. I think both sides of the Hill, they recognize the importance of CSI to effective, especially bank regulation. And so when that information becomes a subject of investigation by Congress, it's handled in a very, very careful manner. And I think that's been a lot of good customs and norms in Congress on handling CSI.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Well, That's it for this episode of Quick Insights on Congressional Investigations. We hope to see you next time.